not hear it. Verum Domini.
Laudetur Christe.
You show up for Mass in the morning, you come to the door, you glance up and see a picture behind you with candles burning and think to yourself, oh no, not another obscure Capuchin saint. Yes, indeed. Today, another obscure Capuchin saint, and this one happens to be a Capuchin Poor Clare. And don't worry, there's another one tomorrow who got on the calendar recently. She was actually martyred in the death camps of, I believe, Dachau is where she was martyred. We'll talk about Maria Teresa Kowalska tomorrow, but today is Mary Magdalena Martinengo's day. She was born in 1687, and her mother had very difficulty giving birth to her. She was, I think, the youngest of 5. I know she had 2 older brothers, and she might have had sisters, I forget exactly. But when she was born, her mother died simply 5 months after her birth, and it was from the complications from birth that she died. And so poor Maria grows up with, eventually a stepmom and so forth. And her father very much cares for her education because they're a wealthy family and so forth, and he wants his daughter to be educated, and so sends her to the Ursuline sisters to teach her. And as a very young girl, she starts her grade school with them, and she is absolutely brilliant off the charts. She particularly masters the language of both Italian and Latin, and becomes quite the reader in Latin books and Italian, and she cannot get enough. She consumes everything she reads. She's a brilliant young girl. And one thing she said that she loved the most above everything else was the breviary. That she would read the breviary. As a little girl, she'd read the Divine Office, and that was really her true spiritual food, was the Divine Office. But then she hits her, she's getting to that getting near junior high. She's visiting home because she was going to a boarding school, and she fell out of the cart and was about to get run over by the horses when some mysterious hand pulled her out of the way. As she described it, a mysterious hand. So she didn't get run over. So there was just a little event in her life. But she decides now she's going to go to junior high. I guess in those days what junior high was, and so she decides to go to school with the Benedictine sisters, where she had 2 aunts, her mother's sisters, who were Benedictine nuns there. Well, she gets there, and she's doing very well in school. She's very brilliant. It doesn't speak much about her prayer life during this time as much as it does her brilliance, and her aunts actually get jealous of her because she's so stinking smart. And they just get a little jealous. They make her life absolutely miserable for her. These are her aunts being jealous of her, a teenage girl. Okay. Anyway, maturity doesn't always translate into our later years, does it? Doesn't carry with us, or we don't enter into it all the time, And then now it's time for her high school years, as we would call it, and she decides she's had it with these 2 aunts and how they treat her, and so she decides to go to, they were Augustinians, they were Augustinians. The other 2 aunts, her mother's other 2 sisters, were Benedictine. So the first were the Augustinians, who treated her terrible. Then she went to school with the Benedictine sisters, and she gets there, and she experiences the Benedictine life and thinks to herself, there's no way I'd ever join these sisters. Even though she had made a vow at 13 that she was going to consecrate her life to God. She sees the Benedictine sisters and goes, no way, these girls are way too worldly, and doesn't like it one bit. So these 2 aunts, who treat her much better than the other 2, are more concerned about her becoming a wealthy baroness, and according to her father, her state in life and so forth, more concerned about her being worldly, as the monastery was very worldly. As if perhaps they were trying to live vicariously through her, trying to convince her to marry and so forth. And she gets confused, quite confused. Right? She's being told by her religious aunts that she should go marry and be courts and so forth and enjoy the wealth and the comforts of life. And so during these years she gets entirely confused. Her father wants to set her up, her uncles are trying to set her up, and then her brothers go and introduce her, and she loved to read. So they introduce her to very bad stories, books that were very impure and so forth, and leads her down this path of just total confusion. And she starts thinking, maybe this whole idea of me giving myself to God isn't the right thing. Maybe I was wrong about it. Maybe I should go off and get married. Maybe I should live in the courts like my aunts told me, and my brothers want me to do, my father wants me to do, my uncles want me to do. And maybe that is more important in my state life. And she's in this midst of this confusion and trying to be torn in every direction and not being properly directed. She winds up this guy winds up falling in love with her and asks her to marry him. She's 18. And she's about to say yes. And a friend of hers says, maybe you should pray about it first. Finally, she had somebody with some common sense who actually spoke to her and told her to pray whether or not this was actually the will of God, right? And so she spends the entire night in prayer, and she wakes, and at the end of the night, she really comes to this conviction that no, her desire from when she was younger was the true desire of God. And I think that's rather true for many people who grow up, particularly in the Catholic faith, who have this experience of religious life and priesthood, who have this desire for religious life and a desire for priesthood when they're younger. And I really believe that God oftentimes will put the desire for the vocation there when we're younger, when our hearts are pure, when our hearts are open, when our hearts are not divided or torn apart. That's where he puts the vocation, so that when later on, when all those storms come, we can rest back on that initial vocation when things were clear, before the confusion. Right? How many priests do you meet who say they used to play Mass when they were little? Right? I don't know how many Ritz crackers I said Mass with and gave them to my sister, who was my congregation. These are three things priests do. Or how many, well, the first kid I baptized, when he was in kindergarten, he used to play Mass with all the other kindergartners. They were all his congregation. And then he would take the book around, he'd process and had all the first grade, the kindergartners, the first grade singing the Hallelujah and everything. It was so cute. He was like really into it. I baptized him with water from the Jordan, maybe that's what did it. But anyway, there was this, that initial vocation is given when we're younger many, many, many times, when the mind is clear, the heart is clear, it's free of distraction, and far more capable of loving in a pure way than as we get older, particularly in our later teen years, when things get very confusing. The world pulls us 1,000 directions. And that was happening to Mary Magdalena. She was being torn in 1,000 directions and being torn away from that initial call that she had from God when she was younger. So she had a deep interior knowledge that she was supposed to join the Capuchin Poor Clares because they were so austere. And that's what she wanted to seek. Everything away from the courts and everything else, away from the pomp and circumstance, away from the wealth and all this other stuff she had seen. And so she enters the Poor Clares at age 18, thinking, this will be wonderful, everything will be fine. Well, she had a bit of a witch of a novice mistress who treated her horribly. And so she had to really enter into humility, because she's coming from affluence, and she's coming from money, she's coming from all this adulation. She had all these men trying to care and suit her, so all of the pride was built up there, and how wonderful she was. Her intelligence was so great that her aunts were jealous of her, so she had this great pride. She enters into the Poor Clare monastery, and boy, did her novice mistress knock her down a few notches. That was the old way of doing things. I remember Father Donatus Getz, he was the novice master when I was a Capuchin. Well, before I entered, but they say Father Donatus would say to novices, he was so tough on them. And one novice said to Father Donatus, you make me feel like 2 cents. And Father Donatus said, well then, Brother Novitius, not working. By now you should feel like nothing. That was kind of the old school method of humility via humiliation. Certainly, Maria Magdalena was brought into that school of humiliation, and she endured it with great peacefulness, because interiorly, as painful as it was, she knew that she needed to go through that to let go of everything. Thanks be to God, just before her profession, the novice mistress has changed, because that novice mistress was going to put her forward for vows, and the new one was like, yeah, she's an old witch, don't worry about it. And she was, she made her profession, and then she held just about every job in the monastery except in the infirmary. Everything else she did. Cooking, cleaning, sewing, portress, everything in those years. But even still in the monastery there were struggles and difficulties, constant humilities that she had to endure. And the Lord began to speak deeply to her heart, where there came this deep and thirsting, burning love for God that, as she writes, nothing could quench. There was this thirst and desire, this burning love to just love God for who He was, these inspirations of the Holy Spirit, and anything, she just wanted nothing more than that intimate union with Him in the silence of the prayer. But then as it grew, it was she wanted to suffer with Him. And she took upon all these silent penances. Right? All these quiet that no one knew about until later on in life, when she was very sick and they were caring for her, they realized just how many penances she had been doing, corporal penances, for the salvation of souls and reparation of sins against our Lord and so forth. These beautiful acts of love that were truly inflamed by love, and they were not so much that she could not carry out her duties. But even within the monks, she did some writings, and even the Lord tested her in the sufferings of emotional sufferings, where these couple of sisters turned against her. And even her spirit director told that she was to burn all of her writings, everything she had written. So they burned all of the letters, everything she had written, burned. She was doing a lot of writing at the time. And she had to suffer that humiliation, which she did because she understood the mystery of humility, the beauty of humility. And she wanted every opportunity to experience it. So as painful as it was, she was glad to receive it. Painful, but glad. It sounds like a strange thing, right? So it's always painful to receive humiliations. We never like being humiliated. It's never fun to be humiliated. However, if we receive it, as painful as it is, we're able then to enter into the humiliation with Christ, in Christ, and offer that for the salvation of souls. Now, eventually she was told to write, and she wrote a lot. Since the year 2000, they have been working very hard on getting all of her writings compiled and published. And they said when they are published, they are going to very much rock the, not rock, but it'd be an incredible source of what 18th century, 17th to 18th century feminine theology looks like. It's absolutely beautiful. The Christology and everything else is incredible. I haven't read them yet. But they're supposed to be coming out, I don't know when, it's been 20-something years now that they've been working on them. But she's a very prolific writer. They say perhaps one of the great theologians of her time, you know. But a lot of it came not from the book reading, once again, from the interior heart united to God. Eventually she was elected abbess, but died shortly afterwards, right? So eventually the Lord rose her up just enough time for her to experience a bit of joy before she entered into the next life and entered the glory of the kingdom of heaven at age 50. She dies in 1737. I think her life really speaks to the importance of how much, first of all, how much the evil one does not want us to follow our vocation. How much the evil one does not want us to be consecrated to the Lord. How much the evil will use all kinds of tactics to distract us and to try to turn us around and try to somehow lead us away from the total gift of ourselves to himself. Right? You look at Maria Magdalena's life and you see these distractions that were setting in, things that were happening to her to distract her. The bad example of the two aunts, who were the Augustinians, and then the bad example of the Benedictine nuns and how they lived their life, you know. And then using her brothers to introduce her to impure things by giving her these books to read. The distractions of the things of the world, these are all things she had to reject in order to live her vocation. And she even describes when she's about to cross the threshold and enter novitiate, enter the cloister, there was a woman who embraced her. And she felt like it was the embrace of Satan trying to hold her back from crossing that threshold. Not that the woman was Satan, but the manner in which she embraced her, holding her so tight, she felt as if it was Satan trying to hold her from crossing that threshold. The evil one does not want us to do the will of God, and we use all kinds of tactics to stop us from fulfilling that vocation to which God has called us to. Right? Whatever it takes, he doesn't care. Whether it's a sin like impure reading, or whether it's the distraction of the things of the world and worldliness, or if it's the bad example of religious, or whatever, he doesn't care, so long as we don't fulfill his will. If he can't get us to commit grave sins, okay, then what he's going to do next is to get us to just be blah, do nothing, right? Then he takes us out of the fight, right? And that's what the evil one was trying to do with her. Trying to get her, when he realized he couldn't tempt her anymore with the bad books and that stuff, to get her to be blah in life. Right? God was calling her to enter into this consuming fire, to be like a stick thrown on the fire so it would light the world and provide grace and warmth for souls. And the devil was like, if I can't get her to sin, I'll just get her to stay out of that fire. I'll just put her on the side so she just becomes some rotted branch off to the side and never does anything. Right? That's one of the tactics of the evil one. Right? But thanks be to God, she had the grace to respond to her vocation and throw herself into the fire of the Lord's consuming love, and persevered in that in such a degree that she allowed herself to become part of that fire that truly enlightens so many souls. This beautiful, beautiful saint today. Saint Mary Magdalene, Blessed Mary Magdalena Martinengo. So we just ask her powerful intercession that she really intercede for us, that we understand that great, divine, powerful love of God for us. She particularly, I should say, was taken up by the holiness of God. She would oftentimes praise the holiness of God as if she was trying to be a seraph with the seraphs, and praising the honor and majesty of God. In the office of readings for her today, one of her writings, she speaks about this, just praising the holiness of God and the beauty of God's holiness. So we ask for intercession that we may truly enter into the fullness of our call, the fullness of our vocation, that we may truly enter into the praising of the holiness of God, that with the seraph we may praise His majesty, but then truly live out our lives consumed by His divine love, and then as part of that love, loving others to such a degree that nothing will stop us from attaining the grace that they may need for the salvation of their souls. May God bless you.